the first heaven, and how it was done away with. It says in Revelation, I saw a great throne and the one who sat on it, from whose face earth and heaven fled away. And no place was found for them, Revelation 20:11, and later, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth had passed away, Revelation 21:1. I explained in the first chapter above, and also in what followed, that the new heaven and the new earth and the passing away of the first heaven and the first earth refer not to the heaven we can see and the earth that we live on, but to the angelic heaven and the church. In its essence, the word is spiritual and therefore deals with spiritual things, and spiritual things have to do with heaven and the church. In the literal meaning, these are expressed by means of earthly things because earthly things serve as the foundation of spiritual ones, and the word would not be a divine work if it did not have this kind of foundation, because it would not be complete. The earthly, which is the outermost level of the divine design, brings about completion, so that the inner things, which are heavenly and spiritual, stand firmly on it the way a house stands on its foundation. However, since people have thought about what it says in the word on the basis of what is earthly rather than what is spiritual, they have understood the heaven and the earth mentioned in these and other passages to mean nothing but the heavens in the physical world and this planet. That is why everyone expects these to disappear and be destroyed, followed by the creation of new ones. So that people will not keep expecting this forever, though, century after century without it occurring, the spiritual meaning of the word has been revealed to make known the meaning of many things in the word. These meanings cannot get through to our comprehension as long as we think in purely earthly terms about what is said, and this includes the meaning of the first heaven and the first earth that will pass away. Before I clarify what is meant by the first heaven and the first earth, though, it is important for you to know that the first heaven does not mean the heavens made up of people who became angels from the time of the first creation of this world up to the present, since that heaven is steadfast and will endure forever. In fact, once people have been received by the Lord, they can never be plucked out of His hand. Rather, the first heaven means a heaven composed of others, of people who had not become angels and in most cases proved unable to become angels. Just below I will relate who they were and what they were like. This is the heaven that is said to have passed away. It is called a heaven because the people in it lived together in high places on rocks and mountains. There they pursued the same kind of pleasures they had enjoyed on earth, but no spiritual pleasures. Many people, as they come into the spiritual world from the physical world, believe they are in heaven when they are in high places, and believe they are experiencing heavenly joy when they experience the kind of pleasures they had enjoyed in this world. That is why the word referred to it as a heaven, but a first heaven that was going to pass away. It is also important to know that although it is called the first heaven, it did not include any of the people who had lived in this world before the Lord's coming. It consisted entirely of people who had lived after His coming, since there is a last judgment at the end of every church. At that time a former heaven is done away with and a new one is created or formed. Between the beginning and the end of a church, allowances are made for all who have lived an outwardly moral life and have maintained reverent and holy outward behavior. This holds true even if they are not doing any of this inwardly, as long as the things they are thinking of inwardly and intending to do can be held in check by the civil and moral laws of society. At the end of a church, though, people's inner natures come to light, and then there is a judgment on those people. Therefore a last judgment has been carried out on the inhabitants of our planet twice before, and a third one has just now happened. Likewise, heaven and earth have passed away twice before and a new heaven and a new earth have been created, heaven and earth meaning the church on each level. We can see, then, that the new heaven and the new earth mentioned in the prophets of the Old Testament are not the new heaven and the new earth mentioned in Revelation. When the Lord was in the world, He brought into being the new heaven and the new earth mentioned by the prophets, and he is now bringing into being the new heaven and the new earth mentioned in Revelation. In the Old Testament prophets, it says of the previous new heaven and new earth, "Behold, I am going to create a new heaven and a new earth, and the former ones will not be remembered." Isaiah 65:17, "And I will make a new heaven and a new earth." Isaiah 66:22, not to mention related passages in Daniel. Since we are now about to deal with the first heaven, which passed away, and since no one knows anything about it, I would like to describe it in the following sequence. Who constituted this first heaven? What it was like? How it passed away? Who constituted this first heaven? The first heaven consisted of all the people on whom the last judgment was carried out. The last judgment was not carried out on people who were in hell or on people who were in heaven or on people who were in the world of spirits. On that world see heaven and hell 421, 520, or on anyone who was still alive in the physical world. The last judgment was carried out only on people who had fashioned a sort of heaven for themselves, most of whom lived in the mountains or on rocky heights. These were the people the Lord meant by the goats that he set on his left, Matthew 25:32, 33, and following. Therefore the first heaven consisted not only of Christians but also of Muslims and people of other religions, all of whom had formed heavens like this for themselves in various different places. I need to say briefly what kind of people these were. They were people who had led lives of outward holiness in the world, but with no concern for inward holiness, people who were fair and honest because of civil and moral laws but not because of divine laws. So they were external or earthly people, not internal or spiritual people. They were devoted to the church's body of teaching and were even capable of teaching it themselves, but were not living by it. They held positions of responsibility of various different kinds and did useful work, but not for the sake of being useful. Among all the people in the whole world who had lived since the Lord's coming, these kinds of people and others like them constituted the first heaven. As a result, this heaven was very much like the world and the church on earth when these are made up of people who do good not because it is a good thing to do but because they fear legal repercussions and the loss of their reputation, honor, and wealth if they do not do it. People who do what is good for no other reasons than these have a fear of other people, but no fear of God and no conscience. Most of the Protestants in the first heaven were people who had a belief in salvation by faith alone but no life in accordance with faith, which means caring. They also had a great love of being admired. The inner natures of all such individuals were closed off when they were in public, so that those natures would not be open to view. However, their inner natures were open to view when the last judgment began, and when that happened it became obvious that they were inwardly obsessed with evils and falsities of all kinds, that they were opposed to the divine, and that they were actually in hell already. This is because after death each of us is immediately allied with kindred spirits, the good with kindred spirits in heaven and the evil with kindred spirits in hell. However, we do not join them openly until our inner natures have been uncovered. In the meanwhile, we can keep company with people who are outwardly like ourselves. It is important to know, though, that everyone who was inwardly good and therefore spiritual was separated from them and taken up into heaven, and that everyone who was evil not only inwardly but outwardly was separated from them and cast into hell. This has been going on continually from the moment the church began after the Lord's coming until the moment it ended, when the last judgment took place. Only those of the kind described just above remained behind and formed among themselves the communities that constituted the first heaven. There are many reasons why allowances were made for communities or heavens like these. The main one is that through the people's outward holiness, honesty, and fairness they were joined to simple but good-hearted people, whether those people constituted the lowest heaven or were still in the world of spirits and had not yet become part of heaven. This is because in the spiritual world there is a communication among all, and everyone is therefore joined to kindred spirits, and the simple but good-hearted people who live in the lowest heaven and the ones who are in the world of spirits pay attention primarily to outward appearances, although they themselves are not evil people inwardly. So if those who were joined to them had been pulled away from them before the appointed time, heaven would have been torn apart at its lowest levels, and yet the lowest level is what the higher heaven rests on as its foundation. In the following words the Lord teaches that this was why allowances were made right up to the final moment. The servants of the owner came and said to him, "Didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did these tares come from?" And they said, "Do you want us to go and gather in the tares?" But he said, "No, because in gathering the tares you might also uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at harvest time I will tell the reapers, first gather the tares and bind them in bundles for burning, then gather the wheat into the barn." The one who sowed good seed is the Son of humanity, the field is the world, the good seeds are the children of the kingdom, the tares are the children of the evil one, the harvest is the close of the age. As the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, that is how it will be at the close of the age. Matthew 13:27, 30, 37, 40. The close of the age means the final time of the church. The tares mean people who are inwardly evil, the wheat means people who are inwardly good. The gathering and binding of the tares into bundles for burning means the last judgment. In the same chapter, there is much the same meaning in the Lord's parable of the gathering in of fish of every kind. In that story the good fish are put in vessels and the bad fish are thrown away. Then it says, that is how it will be at the close of the age. The angels will come forth and separate the wicked from among the righteous. Matthew 13:47, 48, 49. These people are compared to fish because in the spiritual meaning of the word fish mean people who are earthly and external, whether they are good or evil. On the meaning of the righteous, see the footnote below. What the first heaven was like. What I said just above can give you an idea of this. Add to that if people lack spirituality because they have not acknowledged the divine, have not led good lives, and have not desired truth, but for selfish and worldly reasons have nevertheless taken on the appearance of being spiritual by practicing outward holiness, talking about divine matters, and doing upright things, when they are left to their own devices inwardly, they plunge into the wickedness they have been craving. Nothing holds them back, not fear of God, not faith, not conscience. This is why the moment people in the first heaven were brought into their inner natures, it became obvious that they were joined to the hells. How the first heaven passed away. This has already been described in dealing with the last judgment on Muslims and people of other religions and on Catholics, because these groups too were part of the first heaven. It remains to say something about the last judgment on Protestants, also called the Reformed and Evangelicals, or how their part of the first heaven passed away. As already noted, the last judgment was carried out only on the people who constituted the first heaven, not on anyone else. After the Protestants in the first heaven had been taken through a process of assessment and brought into their inner natures, they were divided into groups and sorted out either by the evil they loved and the falsity it gave rise to, or by the falsity they loved and the evil it gave rise to. Then they were cast into the hells that corresponded to their loves. Their hells were on all sides of the central area, because Protestants were in the middle, with Catholics around them, then Muslims around them, and finally people of other religions on the outside. Those among them who were not cast into hells were sent away into wilderness areas. Some of them, though, were sent off into plains to form communities in the southern and northern regions, where they would be taught and prepared for heaven. These are the ones who were saved. As for the details of how all this happened, though, they cannot be described here. The Protestant judgment lasted a long time and was carried out gradually, in stages, and because I saw and heard during that time many things worth mentioning, I would like to present them in sequence as part of the explanation of the book of Revelation. The state of the world and the church from now on. The state of the world from now on will be very much the same as it has been up to the present. This is because the immense change that has taken place in the spiritual world does not impose any change on the earthly world with respect to its outward form. So the business of civil life will go on afterward as it did before. There will be times of peace, and treaties, and wars as there were before, and other things characteristic of communities on both a large and a small scale will continue. When the Lord said that in the last times there will be wars, that nation will then rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and that there will be famines, plagues, and earthquakes in various places, Matthew 24:6, 7. He was referring not to events like this in the earthly world but to events in the spiritual world that correspond to such events on earth. The prophecies in the word are not about kingdoms on earth or nations here, so they are not about wars between them. They are not about famines, plagues, or earthquakes on earth either, but about events that correspond to all these in the spiritual world. As for the state of the church, though, this is what will not be the same from now on. It will be similar in outward appearance, but different with respect to what lies within. Outwardly, the churches will continue to be divided as they have been, each will continue to put forward its own body of teaching as it has in the past, and the religions among non-Christians will continue to be much the same as they have been. However, from now on the people in the church will have greater freedom of thought concerning matters of faith and concerning spiritual things that have to do with heaven because their spiritual freedom has been restored. Everything in the heavens and the hells has now been brought back into its proper order, and it is either from the heavens or from the hells that all our thinking in favor of divine principles or against them flows in. Our thinking in favor of divine principles flows in from the heavens and our thinking against them flows in from the hells. We do not notice this inner change of state, though, because we do not reflect on it or know anything about spiritual freedom or about inflow. It is perceived in heaven, though, and after we die we will perceive it too. It is because spiritual freedom has been restored to us that now the spiritual meaning of the word has been disclosed and its inner divine truths unveiled. In our former state we would not have understood the spiritual meaning, and anyone who did understand it would have profaned it. On the fact that we have freedom by means of the balance between heaven and hell and that we can be reformed only while in a state of freedom, see heaven and hell. I have had various conversations with angels about the future state of the church. They said that they do not know what is to come, because knowing the future belongs to the Lord alone. They do know, though, that the inner slavery and captivity that the people in the church have suffered until now has been taken away, and that now, because freedom has been restored, people can have a better perception of inner truths if they choose to, and in this way can become people of greater depth if they wish. However, the angels said they have only slight hope for people of the Christian church along these lines, but more hope for a particular group of people distant from the Christian world and beyond the reach of its proselytizers. The nature of these people is that they are capable of receiving spiritual light and becoming heavenly, spiritual individuals. The angels added that inner divine truths are being revealed to these people at the present day and are being accepted with a spiritual faith that is, in their lives and in their hearts, and that these people lovingly worship the Lord.